Hey there folks, Rel here. Today we'll be reviewing the NS-30 Vandal, which is the new Nanite System semi-automatic scout rifle. We'll be breaking down the stats and then sizing it up next to the Empire-specific counterparts, and then go into some strategy on how to use it effectively. The NS-30 Vandal is a common pool semi-automatic scout rifle available for the Infiltrator class only, and it's going to run you 1000 certs or 700 station cash to unlock. If you do end up purchasing this weapon with station cash, it will be available across your entire account, meaning available to every infiltrator you own, regardless of faction. Now it deals 334 damage up to 15 meters and then drops off to 280 damage at 75 meters. This means that you're going to drop your target in 3 shots up to around 17 meters and then 4 shots anywhere beyond that. Right now the UI is showing chamber time statistics, which is practically useless for semi-auto scout rifles, but the weapon's actual rate of fire is 255 rounds per minute or 4.25 rounds per second. And this is the exact same as the Empire-specific variants, so don't let the UI throw you off. At that rate of fire, you have a technical time to kill, provided all shots land on the chest, of roughly 0.47 seconds to 0.71 seconds, depending on whether you need that 3 or 4 shot kill range. So within about 17 meters, against a non-nanoweaved armor target, you basically have a weapon that can kill just as fast as many CQC carbines and assault rifles and things like that. But if you do require that 4th shot, your time to kill gets significantly longer. Of course, that super short time to kill is theoretical and will hardly ever work out that way, so it's pretty safe to say that you should keep the weapon out of close quarters when you can and work your mid-range for that reliable 4-shot kill. One undeniable benefit of the Vandal is that it has a 15-round magazine with 75 rounds in reserve. That's 3 rounds per magazine more than the Empire-specific variants. These 3 extra rounds make the world of difference for a player like me who is not going to land shots consistently and can even offer an extra kill per magazine for those players who can. The drawback, however, is that the Vandal has a longer reload speed at 2.6 seconds short and 3.5 seconds long. Empire-specific scout rifles clock in at only 1.9 seconds short and 2.4 seconds long, but when comparing reload times, you've also got to consider that having extra rounds in the magazine means that you don't have to sit through a long reload as often. And if you're fighting at medium ranges, your reload time won't be as significant a disadvantage as the numbers make it out to be. Also, being an infiltrator, you do have a cloak, so using it to reload safely makes significant strides towards removing this downside altogether. A more noteworthy downside to the weapon is that it has a slower projectile speed than its factional counterparts, and the NS-30 Vandal has a muzzle velocity of 520 versus the normal 570. That 50 meter gap is somewhat significant against moving targets outside of the mid-range and made more noticeable when suppressors enter the equation, but if you are using this weapon where it really excels, then this shouldn't be an issue. Before we get into talking about recoil traits, one standout feature of the NS-30 Vandal is that it has a 0.75 times movement speed multiplier while aiming down sights. No other scout rifle shares this trait, and to be completely honest, I'd probably buy the weapon because of this feature alone. Newer players may not notice offhand just how powerful the benefit actually is, but if you do play more aggressively or if you just tend to peek corners or strafe while aiming down sights, then the increased mobility is a great boon to the weapon's performance overall. Unlike other scout rifles, the Vandal recoils up and to the left, like most NS weaponry. Empire-specific scout rifles have basically the same recoil values, but they do recoil straight up and have some horizontal shake. However, neither of these recoil patterns are a huge issue because that vertical recoil is so high that you really won't notice an actual pattern between each squeeze of the trigger. On top of that, the Vandal's center speed or recoil decrease is very low. Now those two traits, the high vertical recoil and the low recoil decrease, create a sort of schism between where you should and should not try compensating for the weapon's recoil. If you fight beyond the 40 to 50 meter mark, you can't just hammer on the trigger. At this range, you'll have to slow down your rate of fire in order to stay accurate. So it's take a shot, settle, take a shot, settle, much like a battle rifle. However, if you are fighting before that 40 meter mark, the weapon is basically spammable as long as you're aiming at the chest and then dragging your mouse down. The weapon also becomes more spammable the closer your target gets. Even with that low recoil decrease, a fraction of a second is all you need to send another near perfect shot down range, and this creates playstyle options on top of the general restrictions that we just talked about. You can play more aggressively and spam the trigger within that 40-meter mark. It works very well at the ranges where it makes sense, but you can also choose to let the weapon settle and then take better aim. I tend to be more of a spammer on targets that are within that 40-meter mark, while a more skilled shooter will be able to land headshots, or at least lead with one, within the same range. Where the Vandal does get a nifty little bonus against its brother weapons is in the hipfire department. Now make no mistake, the hipfire on this weapon is still terrible, but it is better than the other variants. And if you're feeling fancy, you can always slap a laser sight on it. And that'll bring us into the next section, which is attachment options. Now the NS-30 Vandal has access to scopes 1x through 6x, including night vision and 2x reflex. It has a compensator, a flash suppressor, and a standard suppressor, forward grip, laser sight, and flashlight. Scope options are basically preference, but I tend to use the 2x to the 4x depending on my engagement range. Night vision is of course very popular as well, but I have a hard time using it with semi-automatic weapons from about medium range or greater. I tend to adjust my aim based on where bullet tracers go, and with a night vision scope this really isn't possible as tracers are much harder to see. However, I would advise that you stay away from the 6x scope, as it focuses more on ranges where the weapon really isn't suited, and it makes it very difficult to land multiple shots on the same target. This again goes back to the higher vertical recoil on top of the scope sway. For barrel attachments, I consider the compensator the top tier attachment, with a flash suppressor following in a close second. Now the compensator is going to lower your vertical recoil, which is going to give you a noticeably more spammable weapon. When all is said and done, it basically bumps the Vandal's spam range from around 40 meters to 50 meters, and any range before that you can just count on having better accuracy overall. And this is a precision weapon with a high skill ceiling, so accuracy is kind of a big deal. The downsides are that you get a larger hipfire cone of fire, as well as appearing as a radar blip from twice the distance that you normally would. Now the first downside is negated by just not putting yourself into a situation where you need to hipfire, and it's not always the easiest thing to do, but it is an option depending on your playstyle. The second downside is negated by the fact that you're an infiltrator who shouldn't be sitting in the same place for too long to begin with, and you have a cloak. However, if you do not want to run a compensator for whatever reason, then you should at least take the flash suppressor because, just like the battle rifle, you get practically no downside to using one. Flash suppressors will increase your cone of fire bloom values by a very slight amount, but these weapons are so accurate within the first 4 to 6 shots to begin with that you really won't notice the additional bloom before you let your gun settle per usual. And if you're the type of player who lets the gun settle after every shot, then you literally have no downside from using one and gain the upside of not showing off a muzzle flash to your enemies. As with most mid to long range weapons, I really can't recommend a suppressor. Your damage at range is going to take a noticeable hit, you make the weapon's already slower projectile even worse, and you're using a nanite systems weapon in the first place. So nanite system weapons have their own bullet tracers, they have their own audio signatures, and this means that your average player who understands the faction noises are going to have to check their map before they realize whether it's a friend or foe popping off shots, and even then you should always be moving and changing your position. Between the laser sight and the forward grip, each are good. I personally lean toward a laser sight, even with the compensator equipped, to help supplement the weapon's extreme weakness, which is your hipfire cone of fire. The laser sight basically enables you to hipfire successfully within about 5 meters, and the cone of fire is still bad, let's not kid ourselves, but it will certainly up your survivability and kill potential in those situations. Forward grips are going to help increase your control even more, but to me, you're either at a range where you can spam the trigger or you're not, and it really doesn't seem to fall somewhere in between. Because of this, the increased control from the forward grip, to me, is negligible. Even so, if you never plan on hip firing, or if you generally work at longer ranges, then go for a compensator forward grip combo. If you want a setup that's going to be useful regardless of circumstance, then go for a compensator laser sight combo. And if you don't like the downsides of a compensator, then just run a flash suppressor instead. As far as weapon-specific strategy goes, we mentioned this earlier, but I feel it's worth emphasizing again. The closer your target gets, the more heavily you can lay on the trigger, and the more rate of fire that you can take advantage of. Your sweet spot is anything under 40 meters without a compensator, and anything under about 50 meters with one. Now past that, you're going to be pacing your shots in order to stay accurate, and pacing your shots means a lower rate of fire, but you can trade up that lower rate of fire for an increase in accuracy if you do have the skill. That said, when you are in a situation where you can pace your shots, go for headshots. But if you're spamming, go for the chest, while dragging down on the mouse to compensate for the recoil. 2 headshots at any range is going to drop your target, and this makes the weapon painfully powerful in the right hands. But the vertical recoil is so high that landing 2 headshots against a moving target, especially at closer ranges, can be more trouble than it's worth. In the video description, I'm going to post a link to Mustarde's montage on the Vandal, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about there. When he's pacing his shots, he's usually going for headshots, and when he's spamming, he's usually starting at the chest or lower, and if you really want to see how this weapon works from a player much better than I, it is highly suggested that you go take a look at his video. That said, regardless at which range you are fighting, it's important to have the initiative so that you can at least land one shot before the enemy realizes you're there. Whether you play lone wolf or if you play in a squad, you want to flank, you want to use cover, and you want to hit and run on your enemies. It's very difficult to stand toe-to-toe while using a scout rifle because you lack a lot of flexibility in the magazine size and rate of fire departments. Even if your targets are using a carbine that's 40 meters out, it's still possible for them to drop 30 rounds on you and get a kill with the rate of fire alone. This leaves very little room for error. To build on that, whether playing solo or in a group, you want to stay out of the limelight. Now you should not even be on the enemy's radar, metaphorical or otherwise. Use distractions usually found in large battles. Your enemy's attention should not be focused in your general direction if you want to use this weapon to its full potential. The last thing that I would like to caution about while using this weapon is that it's extremely easy to oversample. When you oversample, you lose out on some potential rate of fire. This is because your clicking does not time up with when the weapon is able to fire again. With practice, this can be overcome. If you want to know more about oversampling, there's a link to a video in the description below, and it'll help you figure out how fast you normally pull the trigger and what kinds of weapons are suited to your playstyle because of it. Now that said, I normally don't like to call something best, as most weapons in the game revolve around playstyle differences, and this is no different. It'll likely be good for one person and bad for another. However, both statistically and in function, I can say with confidence that the NS-30 Vandal is the best scout rifle in the game right now. The 3 additional rounds means more room for error and more possible enemies to kill per magazine. The 0.75 movement speed multiplier is less important for newer players, but you'll grow into just how useful it is as you become a better player. The 2 drawbacks are the lower bullet velocity and the longer reload speed, but within the ranges where you should be using this weapon, the lower bullet velocity is easy to compensate for. The longer reload time is not horrible, provided you're staying within the short reload, and having the ability to reload while cloaked really turns this downside into a non-issue. So yes, I absolutely recommend this to any player with both the affinity for semi-automatic weapons and a player who knows how to aim. If you have not owned a scout rifle before and are considering which one to purchase, it's this one. If you do already own an Empire-specific variant and want what feels like almost a direct upgrade, it's also this one. If this video has been interesting, helpful, or entertaining, please feel free to like, subscribe, tell your friends about the channel, and if there's anything that you'd like to add about the NS-30 Vandal, any specific strategies or class setups that you think it works well on, leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Thanks very much, folks. We're all signing off.